thing in football in this country which I refer to as the Culturescape, and it basically refers to the cultural aspects of how we perceive youth development, not just at an elite level, but even to a certain extent at the level of grassroots, with the association clubs, as well as obviously the MPL clubs, the different divisions that you have in MPL, from MPL 1 down to MPL 3 and so forth. So there is a landscape of cultural paradigms that exist, which are developed by the environment that the leaders of the game have created, and it's very hard to detour from that notion of how a parent who to a certain extent is a newbie or doesn't understand the concepts of development walks into this world of club football, and just like the herd effect, you follow the herd. And if the herd is telling you that everything is about competition and winning, people develop opinions based on these parameters, without truly having access to an enhanced level of knowledge about the process. So what is the process? What is the process of development? When does development start? What is the best way to facilitate an environment for your kids to be able to grow and play a game where they can enjoy and have fun? What is it that your children love about the game? What are the things that drive them? What are the things that make them want to go back day after day after day, and put themselves through training and everything else? And there's several factors that are involved there, and those factors are either going to allow your child to grow as a human being, or eventually drop out of the game altogether because of the disappointments and the lack of fun that they end up having. So the Culturescape has become, in my opinion, fairly toxic in some elements, in some parts. It depends on which club you're at, I guess. I've noticed the different clubs have different levels of behaviour from the parents, depending on how well structured the club is, and whether or not the club enforces behavioural rules on the sidelines. Of course, the club can't control a parent, what he does or what she does, what he or she does, what they do outside of the game or outside of the training pitch. And the other thing is that there's an enormous focus on weekend games as being the pinnacle of development. And the reality is the weekend games are not a pinnacle of development. What people don't understand is that children who are learning to control their bodies, learning to control the ball, learning to form relationships, learning to work as in unison, the result shouldn't really play into it. The result is a byproduct of consistent development, of consistency over a long period of time. And one of the reasons why the FFA put together a curriculum was so that every coach can get an education about how to coach kids. Problem we have is that it's still very much unaffordable, and it's very hard to actually access these courses. I mean, it's not hard, but if you work full time and you coach, and it is difficult because you need to take time away and you need to be able to do these things, and they are very costly. They are still quite costly compared to what they cost around the world. I've always said that to me, coaching education is an investment into the game, which will give you a return, a huge return. It's the same logic as the government understanding that for every dollar they invest in health and physical sports, they get a return of around $7. So how does that work? I mean, you put $1 in, you get back 7. It works because it keeps people healthy and it keeps people out of hospitals, and it reduces the cost of medicine to the country, not just in terms of physical health but also mental health. Mental health is probably the main reason why you would put your child into a team sports environment. There's so many positive factors about playing sports, and yet we have situations where, because of a lack of understanding, we ruin it for the kids, and that has to change. We need to be more aware of the process, and one of the things I like to say is that with there's two parts to football. There's the senior competitive part, which is senior football, and it's about competition. It's about the finite result. So going out on the weekend and getting the result for your team, for your club, and winning trophies. That's senior development, senior football. With junior football, it's not about competition. It's about development. So, and that word just gets thrown around all the time, but most people don't even understand what that means. So what it means is that in senior football, it's about the team. In development football, it's about the individual. So you need to focus on the individual, not on the team. The team comes second to the individual. So again, winning is a byproduct of what you're doing. And results generally are not based on how good of a coach you are. It's based on more than that. That's part of it, but it's not all of it. Part of it is the level of the kids that you have at your disposal, whether they are average, below average, above average, elite. So for example, if I was coaching a Western Sydney Wanderers youth team, I would be privileged to have most likely the best of the best kids coming to me. So somebody with my experience and my knowledge, I believe that I could do better with those kids than I would do with kids who still lack fundamental parts to their game. So, being a good coach isn't about results. Being as a good coach is about the long-term effects of what you do. So, as a coach, as a youth development coach, what we need to be able to do is we need to be able to look at children, and instead of saying, what can this child give me today, we need to ask ourselves, what is the potential of this child? Not what can he give us today, but what is the potential of the child, not now, but in 2 or 3 or 4 years' time, with really good holistic development. Once we start to do that, once we start to see potential rather than see results and things that are result driven, because ultimately what ends up happening is you go and you coach a team and you're judged by your results. Full stop. You're judged by your results. Parents, because they don't understand the process, and you have that culture out there, if you're not winning, you're not classified as a good coach. You need to win games. So what you do is you go and you pick kids during the trials, and who do you pick? You pick the kids that you think are going to give you results. And in general, what happens is there's bias. There's a lot of bias in the selection process because we cut kids off with a date stamp. We have this RAE thing that we created, and I still think that it's not adequate enough, that it needs, you need to be able to revisit how you form an opinion about a child at where he is at any particular time in terms of his relative age effect, because we lose a lot of kids to the system who then don't get the expert coaching, or they don't get that environment to be able to become elite, simply because they're not bigger than other kids, because they're not athletic as other kids. You get some kids that may not look athletic but have a really good mindset and they have a really good level of technique, but they won't be given an opportunity and those opportunities are lost. And if those opportunities are lost, we lose our better players to sport, to maybe other sports as well. So it's a matter of being able to, as a parent, being able to recognize these factors and what you think is the best avenue, the best pathway for your child. So right now, in terms of pathways, what we have is we have association football up until the age of about 8, and then you get into your SAPs from 9 to 12, you get into youth football, and then it comes into senior football and under 18s, 19s and 20s and so forth. And unfortunately that pathway is fragmented, and what I mean by fragmented is that you'll go to SAP and there's no guarantee that the club's going to keep your child in that program for 4 years. If he comes in at under 9s, and it's subject to the opinion of who they employ as a coach, it's not subject to the criteria that the club has in terms of selecting a player. It's subject to who gets picked to coach the team. That coach will come in, he might bring in 6 or 7 kids that he's had from somewhere else, and that means your child might be one of the ones that says, well, I'm sorry, but there's no room for you, you need to go and find another club. And that's not right. It just isn't right. There has to be systems in clubs so that you identify talent from an early age and you keep them in your system long enough for those children to reach their potential. Now, what you do is you gauge and measure those players based on certain criteria, and that criteria is, number one, do they have a good attitude? Do they have the support of the parents in terms of ensuring that they come to train, they show up? Are they improving year upon year? If they're not improving, you need to ask yourself why, whether it's something we are doing or whether it's something the child is doing. Maybe the child isn't motivated enough to want to work as hard as some of the other kids. Those are the questions you've got to ask, and this is how you decide whether or not a child stays or doesn't stay. But you may have a child who's got fantastic attitude, great behavior, very supporting parents, but hasn't matured physically because he's born after July, and he's competing against kids that have got a year on them in some cases, 10 months, which is a lot in youth. It's huge. And so your child might be competing against these other more mature, more physically imposing children who are in a completely different timeline in terms of the personal development. And it just isn't fair to compare your child with someone who's double the height, double the strength, So we discriminate on these kids and we say, okay, they're not good enough, when they really are. They're just not big enough or strong enough to be able to compete maybe in their own age group. They should be maybe brought down and played down a year rather than played up. And so again, there's just so many factors to consider when you're going through that pathway, because it is so fragmented. There is no consistency. I'm yet to see, I'm not sure if they're out there or not, but I'm yet to see or hear of any club that has systems in place to deal with these things. And you get some sporadic news from time to time where you hear about a team that's been together for 4 or 5 years, and by the 4th or the 5th year they're killing everybody and they're beating everyone and they're winning everything. And again, why are they doing that? Because they've been together for 4 or 5 years. The core of the team, probably 80 to 90% of the players, are still the same players that were there 4 years earlier. So there's cohesion. The kids understand each other better. The coach understands the players better. He's able to get more out of them because there's been some sort of consistent development model there where the kids aren't jumping from club to club, coach to coach. In this country, it's very, very difficult. I really don't know what advice to give to parents in terms of where the kids should be or who they should play for, because the options are so limited. The only advice I can give is to look for a coach, a mentor, somebody for your child that is consistent, that where your child might be able to go back to that individual once or twice a week aside from club football, where you can get some sort of individual development, some consistent individual development. I guess I'm selling myself here to a certain extent because I run a private school, a small one, and I've always been of the opinion that don't come to me if you just want to come for 5 weeks, because I can't do anything in 5 weeks. I create an environment that is based on long-term results, based on longevity, based on a timeline. So the longer you stay with me, the more chance you have of developing into a better player, because no coach is a magician. No one has a magic wand. You create an environment, you allow the child to come into that environment and develop himself through certain parameters. And all of that doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. It takes a long, long time for children to go from point A to point Z. There's so many steps along the way. But the most important thing is consistency. So as a parent, if you're caught in the world of rep football and you see parents just going crazy because the results aren't there, what you got to ask yourself is, what is happening at training? Is the training game based? Is your child looking forward to training? Is he enjoying his time? Results aside from the results, whether they're enjoying their football or not. So I had a situation this year where I had a team where I had 5 players who were underage. I had a goalkeeper came from park football because we didn't have one come to the trials. We had so many issues in terms of trying to compete, where we played against other teams where the kids were giants compared to my kids. But we never stopped playing football. We never stopped playing out from the back. And of course, we lost a lot of games. But the funny thing was that most of the kids loved coming to training. They enjoyed playing regardless of the result. The ones who were going crazy were the parents, because, like as a parent, you don't want your child to lose every game. That's normal. I get that. I understand that. But you've got to put it into context. Sometimes results isn't everything. And if you're persistent and you know that your son's in a good environment with a coach who cares and looks after your child and gives everybody an equal opportunity, you know your child's in the right environment. Don't go chasing results. That's not going to get your son anywhere. In fact, if anything, putting your son through adversity is what builds resilience. If your son's winning everything and then eventually they get to an age where it all evens out and then they're not scoring 30 goals a game anymore, they don't know how to deal with it because they've never been through that adversity. You're better off being in a team that is mid-table, all right, going through that adversity, learning from mistakes, getting over all the hurdles, and then having the resilience down the track to be able to compete at a higher level, because they know that failure is part of the process, that you need to fail to succeed. That's just the way it is. So I hope this talk has maybe put some perspective in towards a few parents to better understand the process. We really need to change that culturescape in terms of how we facilitate our children's environments through clubs, through academies, through all these different parameters. And I think education is the key, is to listen and to learn and to go out and get yourself educated on the process, on what have other successful people done to get their children to the point where they're becoming top class footballers or tennis players or whatever it is. What did those parents do? What was the process behind their thinking? How did they facilitate what they did? And there's a lot of good books out there. There's Outliers from Malcolm Gladwell and so forth that gives you a look inside how the likes of Serena Williams and Venus Williams became who they became. They weren't born to play tennis. It was planned. It was organised and planned by the father. Beethoven wasn't born to play piano. He just so happened that one of the best piano teachers in Munich or wherever it is that he was from was his father, and he was learning hours and hours and hours of composing and playing pianos. So by the time he was 6 years old, he was seen as a prodigy. He wasn't a prodigy. He just put in the work, put in the time and the effort to become as good as he was at 6 years old. That's what made them prodigies, you know what I mean? Some people, and I got to admit, in some cases, it takes a certain personality, i.e. talent, to become good at anything. You need the personality or some sort of trait that enables you to thrive in the chosen thing that you do. But in many cases, it's just, success is a factor of hard work. of just putting in the time of planning, organizing, having all your timelines and your thought process behind how do I offer and help and assist my children to become the best versions of themselves. If it's this that they want to do, how do I create an environment at home for them to want to do that even more? If they're science geeks, if they love things about space, do you deck out their rooms full of space posters and things like that? Do they like dinosaurs, do you deck out the rooms in dinosaurs? Well, I know when I was growing up, when I was a kid, I was totally crazy about football. So my parents allowed me to put posters on my wall. So the first thing I would see when I would wake up in the morning would be all of my favorite players and teams up on my walls. And the last thing I would see would be the same thing. So every morning it was a reminder of where I wanted to be, and every night before I went to bed it was a reminder of where I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. And that helped me to drive my passion and drive my goal setting in terms of where I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. Is just having that visual reference every morning. I didn't really realize at the time, but I realize it now, that I was actually setting myself up for success by doing that, by putting these visual references up on my walls that said, this is who I want to be, this is where I want to, what I want to do with my life. So there's little things like that can help your children. You create that environment for them to excel. So that's it. If you enjoyed that, take care.